Maggie, my friend, my brother in Christ. Do you know what today is? It's Tier List Tuesday! What's going on with ya, big dog? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day is nothing less than phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Today for Tier List Tuesday, we are going to be making a tier list of the best budget decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Post Photon Hypernova. Photon Hypernova changes a ton in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, and if you want to know about the top budget $50 Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, I just so happen to have made a video yesterday. Go ahead and check it out. But in this particular tier list, we are going to be doing something a little bit different. We are actually going to be grading these particular decks on 3 criteria. The first is our budget is going to be double of yesterday's video, is going to be $100. The second part of this criteria is, can these budget decks actually get stronger with more powerful cards as we go on? The third and final talking point is, how good are these competitive budget decks actually? In this particular tier list, I have 5 different categories: top budget, great budget, takes a really good pilot, could be better, and just pay the bills instead. Look, my guy, I know it's Valentine's Day. You literally could just pay the bills instead. Hopefully those bills will pay for a better Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck, because these ain't it. Let's start off with Abyss Actors, a strategy that got some support inside of Photon Hypernova. I think that this deck, it's a lot of effort, unfortunately. This is actually a really fun Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategy that can catch a lot of players off guard, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Players don't read. But the problem with that is that this deck still is challenged because of its own mechanic and players being able to lock out those pendulum zones. I think that this is a great second or third or fourth deck, a very cheap deck, but I would not invest it as my main budget deck, as adding more staple cards don't help. Dogmatica got some support, and it got a new scary Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. Like, oh my god, White Dogmatica Zoans? Ugh. Overall, the Dogmatica support has been fairly bad. Just pay the bills instead, my guys. This deck is a solid engine for decks, but overall, as an archetype, a strategy, a budget deck that you want to build yourself, it ain't happening. Now, Evil Eyes, I actually have it in my most powerful budget decks under $50, but overall, if you increase the budget, it actually does get a little bit stronger. It is a next budget deck. Cards like Kashtira Fenrir and the Bestial Monsters really do help this strategy, as not only could it disrupt your opponent, but put bodies on your board. Overall, I do think that the deck is fairly strong, but as far as going against some of the better decks in the game, it may struggle a little bit, but overall, it's still a great Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. Exo Stepsisters! So many of you guys asked me, where would I put the Stepsisters post Photon Hypernova and into this format? Unfortunately, they're gonna need a new dryer. Now, Stepsisters didn't necessarily lose a lot on the Forbidden list, and didn't lose a lot when decks like Tearlament, a graveyard-reliant deck, kind of hit the can. The problem with Stepsisters is that there is a lot of interruptions running around in the card game that takes care of this deck. One being Nibiru, the others being Acid Effect Veiler. It's just not a good time for my Stepsisters. I think that it takes a very skilled player that really wants to get into it, that isn't from Alabama. You know, you got to actually submerge yourself into the culture instead of being born into the culture with that deck. Fluendereese did get hit on the Forbidden list, but I don't think that's why it's not a top budget deck and it's the next budget deck. Fluendereese has actually been losing strength over time because other decks are just getting stronger and Fluendereese just flat out isn't. Keep in mind, this deck is almost 2 years old, coming out in Burst of Destiny, and doesn't have any future support on Horizon. It's a solid budget Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck that can win you a ton of games, but I wouldn't sink all of my chips into this deck, as it doesn't really have any scalability with more staple cards you get. Generators, guys.
Yo, you guys, what I said about Leviathan, I gotta get rid of my shrine now.
Generators are a strategy that are pretty good for a budget player. I wouldn't stake my entire budget on it. I think it takes a good pilot deck. Now, if you guys are really into the lore and really want to play this deck, you're gonna have to master a lot of things and play through a lot of disruptions, but it could be fairly rewarding to a player to be able to play one of their favorite decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Unfortunately, doesn't really scale as much with more expensive cards. Gishki, one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, my guy. This is easily a top budget deck. Gishki did lose Sprite Elf on the Forbidden list, but it's still insane, guys. And it can start off as a very, very modest budget deck, just playing pure Gishkis. And as you get more money, well, you get to scale to some of those more powerful cards and then Sprite Gishki. This is probably one of the best models in Photon Hypernova. Basically, what I'm saying is that the more staples and the more money you can put into this deck, it will get you more wins in return. It will get more powerful. Weevil's deck, my guys. Oh, I remember when I thought this deck was the sauce. Just pay the bills instead. The new support is awesome, but it fixed none of the deck's problems. I really wish that this deck was a lot better, but unfortunately, all of the problems are still there. Libromancer Makanko was almost kicked off of this budget tier list, my guys. This deck, oh my god. The Makanko cards went up in price, but fortunately enough, they came back down enough for me to consider it a budget deck. I think it is a top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. When we get Bron de Flor reprinted in March, it's going to be even more magnificent, but this deck is solid. And with the Libromancers getting more support in Cyberstorm Access, this is a deck that can build up to be a very powerful, competent deck. Now, I included both Marincess and Mathmech in this tier list for a couple of reasons. Master Duel players are really adept to them, and then the Cyber strategies are always good, cheap, competitive budget decks. With that being said, I'm going to make a bold take, maybe Copium. Let me know if this is Copium or Hopium down below in the comment section, as well as your Copium and Hopium take for the tier list. But I'm going to put the Marincess into the next budget. I actually love how Marincess could be a really cheap deck. It does have a skill ceiling no matter how many cards you put into the deck. The power that you can get out of this deck isn't as powerful as some of the other decks, but it's really good. We're in a format where hand traps, if you play a lot of them, can be fairly effective against some of the top decks, and this deck is a master of all of it. I would say that Mathmech would be in a similar area. The only beef that I have with Mathmech is that this one's a little more graveyard reliant than Marincess, just a little bit, which could be disrupted a little bit easier, but I think that these are solid decks to be able to get into. Naturia is one of the more interesting decks. It got hit on the Forbidden list and is graveyard reliant. I personally think if your deck is ultra graveyard reliant, that will be a problem in this format, which is the reason why I'm gonna put Naturia's in takes a good pilot. In no shape or form, this deck is bad. It's still really, really good, but being able to play through a Catch-Tier, Rice Heart, and the other disruptions of being reliant on the graveyard may be a big problem later on, whereas these decks, not so as much reliant. Ninjas, my guys. Have you met Ninja Kali yet? Unfortunately, our Sword Soul adversaries have betrayed the budget players, becoming way too expensive for this video. Luckily enough, because of Photon Hypernova, us ninjas have gotten a lot better and are ready to take over as the top budget deck. You're gonna write us up, aren't you? Come on, guys, I really can't lose this job. I got a wife and kids, and I can't go back to the grocery store. He might not be fired after all. Let me know if he should get fired or not. Ninjas are a strategy that I did put into my $50 powerful budget Yu-Gi-Oh decks, and possibly could have an archetype analysis or deck profiles. Ninja is a deck that I think with ninjas, there is a skill cap. No matter how many great cards you put into this deck, I'm not sure if it'll be a top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. I'm not 100% sure or convinced that you should put all of your eggs in that basket, but overall, the deck is still really, really fun to play and extremely good in this card game. Draco Slayers, oh, the Pendulum strategies, they don't feel good at all. I'm going to go ahead and put it in a lot of effort. Upscaling, you know, I'm going to give it a copium take. I do think out of all of the pendulum strategies here, Draco Slayers might be the best one, as it does have some really crazy combos and stuff. And this deck could actually make some very solid interruption boards as well as play through interruptions with ease. Plunder Patrol. Rawr. This deck, top budget deck, maybe if we finish this tier list, could be the lowest of the top budget decks, but still extremely solid, because this is a deck that can play kaijus effectively well, being able to get rid of your opponent's great cards, but also give your opponent a token, which is extremely good against Kashtira. Extremely cheap deck that you can build upon with engines like the Adventure Engine and whatnot. This is a solid deck to be able to start off with. Now, Runic should not be here, so I'm going to skip over it. Runic tips are way too expensive, but even if it was, I'd put it in Pay the Bills instead, because you don't want to be a Runic player. Scareclaw, top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Love its scalability, love its potency inside of the format. This deck is amazing, especially in this particular format where it's adept to being able to go first and break boards and even OTK on the drop of a dime. Scareclaw players would really love this particular format, especially with the new cards with Photon Hypernova. Now, I normally don't bunch decks together that don't really have a resemblance, but I don't have anything for Kiryukishin, and I realize I keep forgetting to put it in. I do think that these two decks, both of those decks, are in a similar spot, and that would be, Sharks aren't necessarily bad. The problem with Sharks is that you're gonna have a hard time convincing me what can Sharks do that Marine Cess can't, and even thinking about it, that Kiryukishin can't. I would put Kiryukishin or Karyushin in Takes a really good pilot, the Umi deck, and I'd put Sharks in a lot of effort. And until the Shark monsters get some great rank 5 water XCs that just blow me out of my mind, I don't see what Sharks do better than Kiryushin, Umi, or Marine Cess. Now, Sky Striker's got some incredible cards that do help them, like Triple Tactics Thrust. Problem, the deck's already a lot of effort. It's getting power creeped out the wazoo right now. It's not a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, but it's always an uphill battle with this deck against some of the other decks, as this deck is almost 5 years old, guys, and those cards just are not enough at this point in time. Spriggans have some amazing going first boards. It's going to be a little bit of a struggle going second. I think it takes a really good pilot. Its scalability of being able to get staple cards and then more Therion King Regulus obviously is a plus side, but I think you have to be a really skilled player to understand how Spriggans work and how to be able to play through a lot of the situations you're going through. Sword Souls prices did go up. Fortunately enough, we have a $100 budget instead of $50, and this is still a top budget Yu-Gi-Oh strategy. Sword Soul just might crack as the top deck in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I'm really excited to be able to see a format where a deck like Sword Soul, which is easy to learn, hard to master, and very rewarding to play, is still good into the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Valance, my boys. This deck actually caught a lot of steam in the beginning of the format, but now as we go, or the end of the last format, but now as we come into the beginning of this format, Pendulum deck, lots of effort. Not necessarily a bad strategy, but players are starting to now play hand traps again. You combine that with the Valance strategy being kind of shaky as it already is, being either a one-trick pony FTK or summon Fossil Dynapachi Cephalo. I'm going to put it in a lot of effort. Lastly, Dark Worlds, Drytron, and the new Traptrix structure deck. Where would I put these three decks? Dark Worlds have went through a lot of turmoil. It's a fairly fun, good, takes a good pilot budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Not necessarily bad whatsoever. It's still fairly powerful. The problem with this strategy is deck building, which is going to be crucial to make a Dark World deck extremely viable. And then the second thing is still going through the obstacles of your opponent being able to manipulate the graveyard and banish your cards, as this deck is ultra graveyard reliant. Not a bad deck though. Drytron got some insanely sneaky support from Photon Hypernova. I ain't even noticed it until my boy Doodle pointed it out, but there's a new card, Dynamond, which allows you to special summon a ritual monster from the graveyard. And what I've been noticing about what Drytron players have been doing is that they'll special summon the Dark Magician of Chaos Max, which prevents your opponent from activating monster effects. Also, that can be used to stop your opponent from using clutch hand traps and bestial monsters. Drytron's actually got a little bit going for them. I would say, I gotta see a little bit more for them. I'm gonna say it's probably one of the best decks that takes a really good pilot. Absolutely love that the Drytron deck is budget, and this is one of those sneaky decks that could actually rise the ranks to potentially next budget or top budget and possibly even into our meta tier list. Now, the last strategy you've been worrying about, my boys, where we're gonna put Traptrix. The strategy definitely got some new support from its own structure deck, and the new support actually makes it a cohesive deck. I think that this deck does have a skill cap from what I've been seeing about Traptrix. Adding powerful staple Yu-Gi-Oh cards doesn't make the deck infinitely better like some of these decks, but it is a solid starter deck that $30 can get you the deck and a really good staple and evenly matched. But that's pretty much all that I have for the budget tier list post Photon Hypernova. I want you to let me know, what did I get wrong? What exactly do you think could be on this list? Also, of course, what do you think I should do a tier list of next? I'll also revisit this budget tier list a little later in the format to see what I got wrong, what I got right, and everything in between. I hope you guys are having an amazing day, and I'll catch you on the next video.